Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of the Radiant Lawcast. I'm your host, Sena. You'll notice that we're doing things a bit differently this time. It's our first remote episode, and it's also our first of a brilliant series that we're starting. We're calling it In-House Legal Gamechangers. Joining me for the very first time is Paul Boyle from Serco. How are you doing, Paul?
Good, thank you, Sena. Great to be here.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. When we started the Lawcast, it was obviously just an idea just to get our thoughts out there into the world, to engage with different people. But then we felt, let's try something different. Let's try get someone who's not at Radiant to get their view on the legal industry and the things that are happening in law in general, and especially for in-house lawyers. So thanks for joining us, Paul.
No problem. And I think I enjoy the format. I think it's been a lesson for me around the pandemic and the lockdown living.
Yes.
Has been how podcasts, and there's so many people who are now looking at podcasts and alternative ways of training. And I think you think differently when you see this or consume this type of media, which I think is really interesting. So well done, Radiant.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. There's a few topics that I'd like to run past you, a few thoughts I'd like to get from you. But as a starter, let's just chat about your journey so far and, how you landed in your current role at Serco.
Yeah, sure. So a lot of it's by luck, a lot of it's by opportunity. But I started traditionally with a legal qualification in New Zealand. I came to the UK in 1997, doing the traditional New Zealand, look outwards from a small island, see some of the world. And I'm afraid I sort of never really made it back. I worked in Sydney I worked at a UK city firm. I worked in Sydney for 5 years at a US firm. I came back to the UK and again went and worked in the city here. And it was just after the financial crash in 2008-9 where prospects dried up a bit in the city, and I was lucky enough to get a role in-house at a telecommunications company, and we ended up having a good old adventure with that, my first in-house adventure, and then we sold that, and I landed at Serco, and I've been here ever since on again another quite fascinating journey, which I'm still really enjoying and really learning about.
Well, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. You've well traveled, I guess.
Yeah.
I like to contrast it to my experience. I studied in South Africa and I've only ever worked in South Africa. So I guess to take it from someone who's kind of been international. But you mentioned that you practice law in New Zealand and as well as in the UK, in the United Kingdom. And that just got me thinking, what some of the lessons, some of the things that you take across from traditional legal practice across both countries. Is it the same? Because I always think, well, if I decided to go practice in New Zealand or the UK, I'll just be acclimatizing myself to the specific statutes and regulations. Is the practice of law sort of the same across the board in those countries?
Yeah, interesting question. I think yes and no. I think no to the extent that there will always be jurisdictional requirements, which I think in a new world, post-globalization, it's only going to get more and more local. So there are local laws that you have to be across. That's the no. But on the yes, it's getting more and more commoditized as far as I think people being able to practice in different jurisdictions.
Yes.
And that's what I saw. I was lucky enough in common law jurisdictions in Australia, New Zealand and the UK to be able to practice. But again, I did corporate, which I think is a much more transferable legal skill, both internationally and in-house. And I think the skills you learn there are really good groundings for an in-house career. And that's where I got pretty lucky.
Oh, brilliant. And then because we always feel, my thoughts on traditional legal practice is that it's at times very rigid. I live in South Africa, but I always think to myself that with the kind of knowledge and stuff that I've trained in here, it should be easily transferable. I mean, it shouldn't have to get to one country and then there's a whole lot of red tape for me to get through just to be a lawyer in that space. But just to touch on sort of more the traditional aspects of it, you've practiced sort of in the usual way, robes and clients and timesheets and all of that, particularly in the UK. I just wanted to get your thoughts on what you think traditional legal practice is like at the moment. Do you feel like we're kind of getting a bit outdated, or the approach to practice in the traditional sense is still pretty relevant in 2022?
Yeah, it's another great question, and I have for about 20 years been waiting for this huge change in the external legal market, and these dynamic forces which were going to bring in huge sways of change to it. But I haven't, to be honest, actually seen too much change to the traditional structure, which continues to be a highly profitable industry, which is not really testing at its core the business model of legal services in the external market. What I have seen, though, is just some incremental chipping away of some of the more commoditized services and some of the disruptive services, which have been chipping away at the edges. But to be frank, I think the market still earns a healthy profit margin and continues to be what it always has been. And I think it's a big question on my mind as to whether the change that we are seeing right here, right now, and right behind me is the hottest day in the UK in history, which is a nice sort of maybe a metaphor for this year, because there is just change everywhere. We never predicted what would happen in 2022, which goes on, and I'm just wondering if that will have unintended consequences for that external profession and the internal profession. So I think it's a really interesting question. But to summarize, I'm still waiting for the hugely disruptive change, which was talked about, other than some of that disruptive services, which I've begun to embrace, but it's not been a wholesale change.
Not been a wholesale change. You mentioned that, traditional legal practice is still profitable. What were, besides the economic situation in 2008, I was still in high school at the time, and I remember how bad it was, especially in this side of the world. What were your push or pull factors towards going in-house and leaving the robes and the gowns behind? Is there anything specifically that pushed you out, or was the in-house opportunity more like pulling you into that space?
I think prospects, because after a huge financial calamitous moment for the world, economic system in the City of London, prospects dried up. So that was that was the push factor. But I always had a curiosity for being part of a business and being part of an organization, and I think that curiosity was the pull, which I was pretty naive when I jumped into the in-house market, but now reflecting on that, I think it has shown me that there is a big difference between the external way of doing business and the internal way, and I'm very lucky that I think I'm much more suited to the internal market, being part of a business.
And that's actually interesting that you say that. So my thoughts have always been that as a lawyer, you're not really part of it. I'll talk about my background, for example, in intellectual property law. So a client will come to you to register a trademark, and they'll say, "Hey, Sena, I want to register a trademark in relation to these goods." You have no idea where they came from with this idea and what it is that got them to this point where they now need brand protection. You're just coming in as a guy to make the IP strategy happen. But for the most part, you're far removed from the actual business. What happens afterward, how they market it, how they use it, you have no idea. And that's kind of felt like I wasn't part of. I was just an extension. Whenever something's needed or whenever things go bad, call the lawyer. But in our everyday running of a business, you're not as involved as a lawyer. Whereas I think when you're in-house, you're more involved in kind of the strategic ways in which a business operates, which I think is great. And I think it's a great opportunity for anyone who's ever thinking of going in-house.
And you're right. I think that's the fundamental difference in how the in-house and external market is structured, simply because there is often a discrete solution that I will want some clever people to solve for me. which I will buy. However, my problems in-house, I can't package them up without a whole different set of behaviors, a whole different set of mindset. There's a leadership structure, there's a management structure, which means I have to involve multiple stakeholders to, whether it's solving the business problems, whether it's executing our strategy, where it's making us more efficient. All of those things require a completely different type of person, type of personality than it does in the in-house market. And I think that what you stumbled on there is one of the fundamental differences. And I've seen how, the external market, it's managed very much in that traditional command and control structure, where Serco, our problems are so broad, they're so unique. I can't do that on my own, so I have to involve a lot of stakeholders. And someone told me when I first joined, when you're at Serco, you'll have a lot of conversations. And it's very true. You have to bring people along, you have to understand where they're at, you have to see what their risks, their opportunities are. All of that is part of being inside this, what is a group of people trying to pull in the same direction, often having conflicting aims and desires.
Yes.
Whereas you see in the in-house, it's a much more, I think, more discrete team structure, and just has different behaviors in order to do what you've just described there. So I think it's a really fundamental perception of the difference and what it entails to be good at, both sides of the fence.
No, totally get it. You did mention that, the few things that took you by surprise or that you weren't expecting, just in terms of overall sort of working relationship when you go in-house. Are there any particular moments where you look back and you're like, okay, well, I wasn't expecting that, or that took me by surprise? Glad to know. Are there any specific instances where you're like, from memory, oh, okay, that's weird?
Not really. I think what's been really interesting and surprising is just, I think it's a fundamental difference, is just how difficult it is to change a large organization, and how much effort and energy it takes when you have a big creature like Serco, and just watching it change. And I think my naivety when I first came here was that it was maybe a one particular group, one particular person, one particular energy or effort would procure that change, but it's not. It's a collective, I think, change, or it's a collective behavior and planning, and a lot of things go into it. And I think one of the fascinating things for me, one of the surprising things, is being involved in a turnaround strategy, where I've been able to see that. And so I think that was sort of an interesting learning, an interesting sort of surprise, which, coming from an in-house environment, you don't really see that. I think, as you said before, you'll do a transaction, done, next. New transaction, done, next. Again, it's suited to people who do it. But if you want to change an organization, or you want to bring about wholesale change, you need a bit more than that type of business model.
Okay, no, that's great. That's great. One of the things that I tend to think about, you're talking about changing an organization. One of the things that comes to my mind is handling of contracts, right? We deal primarily in legal. Whenever there's a contract that needs to be signed, I assume that when you're the in-house lawyer in a big company, a lot of the agreements will come to you. I'll say this, but not tongue-in-cheek or not hiding my opinion on this, but I feel like as lawyers, or business views lawyers as the entities that slow things down, right? Because they're trying to get things off the line. They're trying to get deals done. They just want to, whether or not they're procuring goods or providing a service, literally all business wants to do is tell us when we can go. We just want to go and work. We just want to get the stuff in. And that's a general sense that I get, that when it comes to legal, then legal has to kind of go through the agreements and make sure that everything's fine, that a lot of commercial contacts will feel like the lawyers are slowing down the process. Just in terms of the contracting experience at Serco, I assume that you guys work through a lot of agreements. I'm not sure how many, but how do you feel that legal fits into it, and how do you feel like, do we really make the process better? Do you feel like as a legal team you make everything tick in the way it's supposed to?
Yeah. I think it's another really interesting question, where when I first came in-house, I responded to he or she who shouted loudest. And that was my process.
Yeah.
And again, you start to see how that old-fashioned saying, the sales prevention force is the legal team. And if that's happening, that's a process fail. It's as simple as that. And that's what I've learned.
It's a process fail.
It's a process fail, because if there's clear responsibilities, if there's clear understanding of how a contract works and how it's governed, then legal shouldn't be holding up a process if it's followed properly. So part of our responsibility, part of my responsibility, is looking at that process and seeing how those blockers and how that contracting process is made much easier, and we prevent that situation from happening. And 9 times out of 10, although sometimes you do have to jump, there are always urgent projects. You are sometimes too busy to execute what you've got on your plate. There'll always be those moments, but in my experience, 9 times out of 10, that view of legal holding it up is a process fail, and it's people not following a process, or you have a process which hasn't been given due attention. And it's one thing we are really hot on here, because I think we had about 600 supply projects to execute within the business unit that we look at. That's just on the procurement side internationally. So in order for us to effectively execute that work stack, you've got to get slick. You've got to have a fairly good understanding, and an understanding across the whole ecosystem of who's doing what. And that's what gets you out of that sort of perception that legal is holding it up. Because if you're brought in at the last minute, that's inevitably what happens.
Of course. And you did say that process makes everything better. Just in terms of the actual process, I assume that you handle large volumes of contracts in a year or in a month. How do you make sure that you get through those volumes while still maintaining the process? Are there like innovative things that you come up with, or sort of innovative strategies that you say, okay, no, I think how maybe it's 600 contracts a month, or 600 projects that you're working on within maybe 6 months. I don't know how long generally it'll take you guys, but are there things that you've come up with that you say, okay, I think that will fix the problem?
Yeah, there's no magic wand to this, and there's a combination of technology which we can talk about, and resource and process. But I think the very first building block, and it's a good lesson for me, is just understanding what. I think teams which don't understand what they're executing and the volumes that they're executing, you'll never have a chance of cracking those volumes, because you have to understand what that work stack is and what's going to come in. And then you have to design a process, design a team, design a technology, design your external providers around that. So I think that's sort of the initial lesson for me, is the analysis and just getting that sort of underlying data on the what. And from there, there's a combination of things. Again, Serco has a complicated, by the nature of the business we do, we have complicated customer contracts.
Yes.
A bit less complicated on the supply side, although Ian and Maeve are crying out for us to reduce our terms, which we need to do, because the Radiant data has showed that we're behind the 8 ball as far as time to contract is concerned. So again, that's a valuable, I would say, innovation and learning for us to reduce our contracting. And then we sort of come to technology, which I'm not a Luddite, but I'm not quite there. And Alex and I have had these conversations around technology necessarily being the magic bullet for legal services.
Okay.
And a lot of executing, legal outcomes by nature of what it is, unless it's highly commoditized.
Okay.
Then I'm still in the skeptical area here.
Okay.
But I fully embrace and get that lawyers and law firms and teams enabled by technology and just using it better is a huge enhancement, a huge innovation. And we're lucky enough to have some firm-wide infrastructure and tools that we're just learning how to use better. And that's been, I think, a huge uplifting or a huge game changer for us as far as our time to contract is concerned. But I'm yet to find the robot who is going to provide the end-to-end advice for me. I think well, I have some views on why I think we're a long way from that.
Okay, that would be interesting to learn. I have had a conversation with both Maeve and Alex about the use of technology. Maeve's view was that the issue is adoption. I think we have particular difficulties as lawyers in just adopting legal tech and using it in the right way, and probably the way that maybe optimizes the way that we deal with contracts. So if we're looking to reduce the time to close and you're spending, I don't know, 2 hours on a Word document doing formatting and something which, if we adopted tech and use it the right way, we could have it sorted out in a snap, just like that. So I do think there is room to probably improve the manner in which we adopt technology. I think in as lawyers or as law firms, there's good changes that could be made in just how we approach it, and that could just lead to better results in reducing time to close and optimizing our contracting processes. But I'm keen for tech. Change is not always easy, but I get how some people might be a bit more reluctant at times. And we've spoken about how you've transformed sort of Serco. Do you have specific moments where you're like, okay, no, that was a great change? And do you have some ideas where you've tried to make a change, obviously going in-house and it hasn't really worked out so well, or it's just taken time to implement, but hasn't been easy to implement?
Yeah, sure. And I think, again, some of this comes back to the essence of the in-house role, that in order to be effective, you have to be across, in a Serco's case, a wide business breadth, industry scale. What we do is quite daunting. So one tech solution is not going to cover or give me comfort around the judgment I need to take to bring in all those stakeholders. And that's what I was talking about. There's a lot of discrete technologies that will increase your marginal gains. Look at Microsoft Word. Look what it's done at its infancy. Your ability to search, you have doc management, then you have some of the more sophisticated tools that we're now seeing, which are great, and they're great for the marginal gain. And I totally agree with you that that being adopted, some firms do it much better than others, gives you that a marginal, I think, competitive edge. I fully agree with it. However, if I look at my fails, which kind of brings out, where a naive attempt at using technology or systems has come unstuck. And for me, implementing technology and implementing systems comes with, again, what we talked about earlier was many more people than just me. There's a requirement to bring along my IT colleagues who are responsible for a complicated, fast-moving piece of IT infrastructure.
Yes.
I have to bring on my legal colleagues who have habits and they don't want to change.
Yeah.
I have to bring along my procurement colleagues who want the best price for a product, or we might be stuck with another product. I have to bring in my comms colleagues because I have to keep the messages going out without another new system or another technology that we're implementing.
Yeah.
So you can see here, I think the lesson we've had is with trying to adopt technology where we haven't got those stakeholders on board.
Yeah.
And I think a key lesson to me is it's easy getting it in, but the adoption of it, as you discussed, and also the constant, I think, refreshing of that technology and the constant updating of it is an effort which I think I failed to appreciate until I've probably failed a couple of times. And that, I think, is when I look at a lot of the vendors who are selling legal tech, I look at the level of input, the level of engagement that is needed from my team to assure something that it's going to spit out the right answers, even with artificial intelligence and the way it's programmed, again, unless that's highly standardized or highly commoditized, it's going to require me or one of my team to make sure that the results coming out are accurate. It's going to require constantly refreshing that tech so it's doing what I want it to do. And that's a lot of effort. It's a lot of hard work, which is my lessons around attempting to use technology to transform. So where I'm currently at is more of the incremental use of sort of marginal gains to increase and look at our processes and look at how we can be much more efficient that way. And by using data a lot more cleverly and reporting on it. That's where I think I've sort of learned the lessons and slowly have been able to just transform or just do things differently with a finite resource.
Okay. And different stakeholders mean different interests and different challenges. So I can totally appreciate how difficult that must be, or a difficult job it is.
And conversations, as I said, there's more conversations to be had. And I can't do this on my own. I can't sit there with one helper and just send a few emails out. You have to bring people together. You have to kick the tires. You have to do, it's a lot of work. And you have to think, is the effort to do this, or is the investment to do this going to be worth the outcome? And that's where I said, I'm afraid I look at some of the bigger legal tech that's around, and I think at the moment we will keep doing what we're doing with some marginal change because we haven't got the scale of the commoditized outcomes that we want for some of these tech products to service.
Okay. No, I totally get it. And then just before we wrap up, 5 years from now, when you reflect and just say, okay, what's going to be the state of in-house legal practice, or what's the in-house legal lawyer going to be looking like, and in a Serco sort of world, what do you think the future holds? Because growing up, I always, and I say this all the time, I'm going to go to law school, and then I'll do my training, and then after training I'll write my board exams, and then after writing my board exams I'll work in this law firm and eventually make partner, retire, and that's just how I've always seen it. Obviously, I think the perspective is changing. Young lawyers are dreaming differently. They're thinking about, I might want to go in-house. Like I know there's people that are set off now doing law degrees, not necessarily wishing to go the traditional path. When you look at in-house as an in-house counsel 5 years from now, what do you think is going to look like generally? And do you think you'll just have more people wanting to get into that space from the bat? Because I don't think it's easy when you're actually a youngster coming up to immediately go in-house. You feel almost like you need to do your time somewhere first and then come in as a trusted head.
Yeah, it's a big question. And I think I put this in context that I think, as we said before, there's some macroeconomic unintended consequences out there. Things such as inflation, things such as age profile of people, and that sort of globalization we talked about, and whether that is actually the end of an era, I think is going to be a huge influence on what the future in-house counsel looks like. And if I crystal ball gazed from a Serco lens, I would see many smart, capable, younger people coming through a graduate route who have a understanding of law and a law degree, but not necessarily a heightened specialism, but the ability to use that degree or even use other skills which are applicable to what we need, which is to understand the breadth of our organization, to be able to negotiate contracts, to be able to spot issues, to be agile, and to have all those sort of operational attributes, but also have attributes such as being able to have interpersonal skills, being able to think strategically. That, I think, is the future in-house counsel for me. And saying counsel, not legal counsel, on purpose, because I don't see the requirement for a hardcore long legal qualification other than for regulated areas, as being quite a necessity in 5 years' time.
Okay, wow, that's big. That's big. But it's also encouraging, I think, for everyone who may not necessarily want to go that whole LLB route and exams and all of that stuff. So that's really interesting to know, Paul. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sena.
Awesome. Just before we wrap up, obviously it's the hottest week in the year for you at the moment. Middle of summer in the UK. I'm so jealous. You got any big sort of plans coming up?
Plans, not really. I'm a cricketer. I love cricket. It's my interest and passion outside work. So those are my summer plans. Every Saturday when it's not raining, it's the opportunity for me to get outside, and I have an afternoon where I have no phones, I have no one around.
Yeah.
And that's what my summer plans will hopefully be, Sena.
Okay. Do you have a team that you play for?
I do. I play for Penn and Tyler's Green, which is my local team, and they are a good bunch who keep me grounded.
Awesome. I used to open the batting in high school. That's only because my friends will always get to face the first ball. I don't think I ever hit 100, but I think I was pretty decent.
And do you have are you one of these people who has to face the first ball or has to face the second ball?
I have to face the first ball.
You have to face. So you're the striker, not the non-striker. Same with me. It's just
striker. I feel like once I get it out of the way, like my nerves are better. I've never been bowled out first ball, but I always feel like it's rare for someone to get you in the first ball. And once your nerves are settled, you're facing their best bowler. Once you deal with that, your innings becomes better. Rather ride it out in the beginning, and then I think you'll play much better.
So fellow opener, I'd take the strike as well. I always like to get it over with. How unfortunately though, it was fourth ball on Saturday, and that was my afternoon.
Ooh, LBW, caught out, bowled out.
Caught playing a poor shot.
Of course. Caught isn't too bad. Bowled is the worst. The worst.
Agreed.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Paul. Appreciate your time.
Great, Sena. Great to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Everyone, please check out the rest of the videos on YouTube. It's on the Radiant Law YouTube page. Thank you so much. We're out. Bye.